Hey, Awesomes. Instructor Corio here with how to write a method section for your APA or research paper. All right, so here we are on our methods section. All right, the methods page. Keep in mind we're on page 8 at this point because we have written our previous sections prior to that. In addition to our introduction, right, we have the literature review, right, and recall too we have our abstract, and of course the very first page being our title page. All right. So we have all those. So by the time we get to methods, depending on what order you write them in, right? Method section might be page 8, could be page 6, could be page 5, could be page, who knows? Okay. It's just our page 8 right here because I have a lot of materials also that I'm providing for you as well. So to think about methods, the primary purpose of the method section is to provide enough detail and information so that the reader can replicate your study. Now, primarily, a lot of times you'll find, especially in social sciences, obviously the harder sciences, right? This will be primarily a lot in the form of experiments, or they conducted a particular type of experiment where they called in, let's say they had a bunch of people come in as participants, right, in a particular study where they performed an activity, where were asked some questions or asked to do something, and then they took the hard data as a result of those, and then they are going to then present those, right? So this is where you would put a lot of that information. We had 67 people, 67 participants come in. In the case of survey, they would be respondents, or interviews, right? Interviewees. And then, of course, questionnaires might be more random, but you'd get so many samples that were submitted or completed. Out of maybe perhaps so many that were sent out, giving you an idea, and you can present those numbers in your results. So in ours, I know several of you have primary research methods, and a lot of these are going to be in the form of surveys. Several of you I know are performing some interviews as well, and perhaps maybe you're doing a questionnaire at the same time. So this is where you will talk about what did you do, right? All right, so if you conducted a survey, what did you do? How were they distributed? How did you make some of these decisions? Where were they sent? If you did interviews, how did you do that? How did you set those interviews up? Roughly, how many people did you talk to? What's another good one? Observations. So an observation is like, how long did you observe? How many times did you go to X, Y, Z place, or X place, or Y place and Z place to make these observations? What time of day were you there? From what time to what time? How many hours? How many minutes? Whatever. This is kind of the details of what you did. Okay. So in this section 2, in addition to just saying we conducted a survey and we did this and that and the other, right? Some of the details. Also an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about the methodology. Perhaps how did you arrive at that particular type of method? What kind of informed your decision to do surveys? Why did you think it was perhaps a good idea? And then we get into a little bit more details. How did you develop the survey questions, interview questions, maybe the type of observations that you did, what led to that? How did you administer, conduct, or perform the observation? Did you send it out through maybe SurveyMonkey, MailChimp, Qualtrics, any one of these other ones, any one that you use, right? There's not a wrong one, right? How did you get the survey once you put those questions together on the survey? How did you get them there? How did you get the data back? This is really kind of the details behind the scene. And there again, kind of remember that for the purpose of this, I want to try to provide as much of the details, right? As much information so that someone could technically sit down and read your methods and go and perform it. And replicate it as close as possible. So how many surveys were completed, how many interviews, those type of things oftentimes will come in the results section. Some will put them in here, just kind of as more of a numerical shot, right? To say, okay, we sent out 100, or we sent it out via email to 4 groups of people, and those 4 groups of people totaled about 120, and of 120 those 67 whatever did it, completed it, and anything else that you did from a primary research standpoint. So here is I give you this tried to give you this short version as I possibly could to kind of just give you an idea of kind of how these things read, um, what they kind of look like, how, what did I do, how did I present. Mine was by and large mostly primary research in a kind of a combination form. All right, mine was kind of a mixed method study. So I did surveys, I did interviews, and I did observation. And this is mostly from the surveys, paragraphs, if you will. I think there's a little bit about how I selected the interviews. So it gives us, what I exactly did, even down to the detail here, as you'll notice, right? To select the target number of 5 respondents to interviews, I used a random generator online, right? Because I had X number of people. I had 13 people out of the survey respondents that said they'd be willing to do a follow-up interview. So I needed a minimum of 5 of those for my project. And so I went to here's a website I went to, randomizer.org. So I put in numbers 1 through 13. I told them to randomize, and I just selected the first, and this is the sequence, right? As I give right here, this is the sequence that it gave me, right? And so I selected 10, 7, 13, 3, and 4. I was only able to make contact with 2 of the 5. So then the next ones, so I just kind of gave all the details behind. So if someone wanted to come back in and replicate this, they could come in and say, okay, I'm going to randomize the same way. I'm going to use these same numbers, right? And I'm going to interview 10, 7, 1, 12, and 2, just like Corey did, right? And then respond to interviews consisted of 9 open-ended questions. So really kind of giving the background details here. I had a lot more a little more to go over, of course, the following paragraphs from this, since I didn't copy and paste the whole multi-page method section of the primary research. So here, giving the details, right? And there again, always keep in mind, what information do I need to give the person who is reading this so that they could replicate it, okay? Secondary research is a little bit more challenging sometimes, but I always stress and give everyone an opportunity to try this because it's really good. It helps you to reflect on what you did as a researcher. All right, so I did this for my dissertation as well, and you can see my paragraph to follow here. It's to locate the necessary scholarly sources, determine how and why and where there was such a narrow view of why megachurches have grown. My initial search began with the WSU library database using the ProQuest search engine, right? Sounds very straightforward, right? But then we kind of move into early searches using terms like megachurch growth, megachurch growth studies. Yielded a few decent results, right? And then and as you read this, and I tried to give you enough to so you can see how this also demonstrating this change. When you're talking about method, this is what you did, right? Started off, I was typing these terms, right? I was only getting so much results, so you had to make an adjustment. So you type in maybe some different words, or you found a certain database that was there. We talk a lot about when it comes to these type of papers, of being in the conversation of the within the topic, especially how you're approaching the topic, right? Not just not just the topic at all of the conversation, but a lot of times we're trying to get, where's the specific area, right, in which you yourself are talking about, right? What does the group of people that are talking about this from an academic standpoint or a scholarly standpoint, from these different publications, coming from these particular voices, talking kind of very specifically about the same thing that you're talking about, even approaching it the same way. How did you find them, right? How did you get there, right? So a lot of times there will be these moments where you make fine-tune adjustments. It could be from the type of database that you're using to find them, also keywords that you use. And I think I make mention that if I give you enough here. Yes, right down here, right? So one of the things that I learned once I found some of these publications like Project News, Communication, Mass Media Complete, and ATL regional databases that had a lot of the type of religious and or theological publications that were talking about what I was trying to find, they didn't necessarily always use the term megachurch in their title or subtitle or their abstract, and sometimes very few even used the term megachurch, and that might be somewhere way down, page 9 or 22 or whatever. A lot of times they focused on what they called the largest or largest congregations. A lot of it's talked about just church growth in general, and it's kind of assumed that and maybe they'll say the word megachurch somewhere, maybe once or twice. But oftentimes they're talking more about large congregational churches, large churches, where there is a mass attendance week in and week out. So so I demonstrate here in these paragraphs that particular thing, right? I went through this process, and while the end quote unquote result of finding my particular resources that I needed were found here, here's how I got there. So the ones that you've read about, maybe you've already read a little bit about, right, in my literature review. The ones that I'm really going to be discussing, though, in the discussion section, right, results section, and the discuss what's coming, right, what's coming down, right, what's in the results section and the discussion section. Here's how I found those, right. So that's what this is kind of going through. So feel free to bring in those details, right. To database, right? If I copy pasted more, right? There's a section where I was able to find more megachurch results through Google Scholar. So, and I make some conjectures as to possibly why that is, but it's in some cases Google Scholar is also drawing from databases. It's also drawing from university databases, whereas Google Scholar is drawing from perhaps a lot more. Not just the databases perhaps that your university subscribes to. So there's you might get some different types of results. They also yielded some really good results, and stumbled upon some really, really good scholars that had a bunch of other publications that I would never have found had I not found the one, right? Right. So oftentimes, we always trying to find those good articles. And so this is where your methods section can explicate and explain and provide enough detail. While they might not be able to exactly completely replicate it, they come pretty close to finding out. You say, okay. Plus, someone reading this too can read this and go, okay, with their message, okay, this is where your ethos, your credibility really gets a nice shot as well, right, or a boost. Tell someone as much of the details in your primary and your secondary research to really give them an opportunity to not only they could do it and replicate it pretty close. Primary research is going to be a little, I don't say easier, but more straightforward. Secondary research might be a little bit more hit or miss, and they have to go straight to the Wayne State, University Library database, etc. But with Google Scholar, in some cases, perhaps going to come a little closer unless something new comes out. They should be able to go and get a good idea of a sense of, they can type in those search terms with that search engine and see what kind of results that you were playing with and that you got, right? So it's kind of this like not just an ethos building, but in the world of academia, scholarly research. It also gives the reader, especially if it's someone who's really into this topic and into the field, also an opportunity to go and look at that and say, okay, if I were reviewing this, right, if this was going to be peer reviewed, right, and become a scholarly source, they would use a lot of this information to see how you discovered and found the information. Are there sources or resources perhaps that you may have overlooked? It might have been something within the methods section that would help that, right, that could then continue to further and grow our knowledge and understanding of this topic. So that's what you're essentially doing here. Literally, I continue. You are literally stating what you did, search terms, what abstracts did you read. I always try to provide as much of this information as possible, but not, inundate them with too much. Just enough where they can still get to that. Our primary goal. I'll leave you with this. Primary purpose, method section, is to provide enough detailed information so the reader could replicate your study exactly, especially with primary. Secondary, at least get really, really, really close. All right, guys, that does it for me. Thanks for watching. Hope you found